This is section 3.8, inverses and radical functions. So inverse functions are functions that undo each other. And one way we can verify inverse functions is using Fogg and Goff that we learned earlier. So if two functions are inverses, then g of f of x is going to equal f of g of x. So Goff is equal to Fogg, and they both are equal to x. So let's show that f of x and its inverse are actually inverses, except for x equals 0 and -1. So our first step is to take, let's do f of g of x. Okay, so that means we're doing f of 1 over x minus 1, which is 1 over, and then instead of x, we're going to have 1 over x minus 1, or plus, and then plus 1. Notice that minus 1 plus 1 cancels out, so now we have 1 over x, which is the same thing as 1 times x over 1, which is just x. So that worked pretty well. Let's try Goff. So Goff, so we're taking g of 1 over x plus 1. So we have 1 over x plus 1 minus 1. If you haven't learned this trick at all, 1 over a fraction, you just flip the fraction. So that just becomes x plus 1, and then minus 1, which is just x. Since we were able to get Fogg and Goff to both work out to be x, these are indeed inverse functions. So to find inverse functions, we're going to switch our x and y and solve for y. If you were to graph a function and its inverse on a graph, the graphs are symmetric over the line y equals x. So let's start by finding the inverse of f. So remember that f of x is the same thing as y, so I'm going to switch x and y. So now I'm going to say x is equal to the cubed root of y plus 4. And my goal now is to get y by itself. So I'm going to cube each side, because that's going to get rid of the cube root. So x cubed plus 4 equals, wrong side. X cubed equals y plus 4. Solving for y, so subtract 4, x cubed minus 4 equals y. I would write it as f to the -1, that means inverse, is equal to x cubed minus 4. So that's our inverse for f. Let's look at g. g of x is equal to 5x cubed plus 1. Well, I'm going to switch my x's and my y's, so now x is equal to 5y cubed plus 1. I'm going to subtract 1. X minus 1 equals 5y cubed. Divide by 5, so divide this whole side by 5. And we have x minus 1 all over 5 equals y cubed. To get rid of the cubed, we take the cubed root of both sides. So now our g inverse of x is equal to the cubed root of x minus 1 all over 5. So notice that if a function's not one-to-one, it can't have an inverse. So remember, a one-to-one function means it passes the horizontal line test. So if we think about it, the classic example of this is going to be our quadratic function. So our quadratic function looks like this. Okay? We said that inverses are symmetric over the line y equals x. So our inverse actually looks like this. The problem with this is that the inverse is not actually a function, because it fails the vertical line test. That's because our original failed the horizontal line test. So what we can do if we want the inverse to be a function, we can restrict the domain. Okay, I can say I'm only going to look at x is less than or equal to 0 for our original function, which means now that's going to correspond with this piece of the inverse. So now we can forget about those other two pieces, and now our inverse is indeed a function. Personally, I'm not concerned about the domain. You can usually figure things out by looking at a graphing calculator. I am more concerned about you being able to calculate inverses and find them. So don't worry about restricting the domain if the assignment asks you to do that. So let's just do some more inverses. Find the inverse of each function. So let's start with the first one, f. Remember, switch x and y, so x equals the quantity y minus 4 squared. Take the inverse, so we are trying to find y, so do the opposite. Remember, when you do a square root or a fourth root, okay, then you have the plus or minus. And then we need to add 4 to both sides. So 4 plus or minus the square root of x is equal to y, which I'm going to replace with f inverse. Next one, for g, we have, I'm going to switch x and y, so y minus 2, x equals y minus 2 squared minus 3. So add 3 to both sides. X plus 3 equals the quantity y minus 2 squared. Take the square root of both sides, so we have plus or minus the square root of x plus 3 equals y minus 2. Add 2 to both sides. 2 plus or minus the square root of x plus 3. And instead of y, I'm going to write g inverse. And then our last one. So I'm going to switch x and y. So now x is equal to the square root of 2y plus 3. Square both sides. So x squared equals 2y plus 3 minus 3. X squared minus 3 equals 2y. Divide by 2, divide the whole thing by 2. X squared minus 3 all over 2 is equal to, instead of y, I'm going to write h inverse of x.